Best story-driven, less-known games. If you're looking for those, you found the right video. Ever since I played Life is Strange for the first time, I've been searching for games similar to it, with a rich storyline and emotional that would sort of make me sad or make me laugh or make me feel anything basically. And I found a bunch of games that are quite similar to Life is Strange. Obviously, if you don't know Life is Strange and if you're watching that video, chances are you do know Life is Strange. I can only highly recommend. It's a fantastic game. It's based on choices, so this is also a quality that I'm looking for in those games. Both Life is Strange and Life is Strange 2 are fantastic story-driven games, as well as the prequel called Before the Storm. Now, I don't want to talk about famous games because that's not the point of that video. There's so many story-driven games that are quite popular, like The Last of Us, or the Telltale games like The Walking Dead or Game of Thrones or Wolf Among Us. Obviously the PlayStation exclusives like Detroit Become Human, Until Dawn, Heavy Rain or Beyond Two Souls. These are all great games that you probably know, so I'm going to focus on less popular titles. I also didn't want to focus on extremely indie games, so they're all quite similar to one another except for maybe one title. I have handpicked 10 games that I'm going to briefly discuss right now, so if you're looking for less known story-driven games, here we go. Before we jump right into it, I'd like to shout out my Patreons. Thank you so much for your help, especially lately I've been having some problems, mostly with my cat. I had a big support when it comes to my patrons, so I do want to thank Robert, Chris H, Chris M, John and Noel for helping me out, and all of you patrons. I really don't deserve the support that you've been giving me. First game that I want to discuss is actually called Firewatch, and it's probably my favorite one on that list. Firewatch was developed by Camposanto Studio. Now Camposanto was created by some of the former Telltale Games writers. They created that studio before Telltale went bankrupt, so I guess they were right to do so. Firewatch is a mystery set in the Wyoming wilderness where your only emotional lifeline is the person on the other end of a handheld radio. The year is 1989. You're a man named Henry who has retreated from messy life to work as a fire lookout in the Wyoming wilderness. Perched atop a mountain, it's your job to find smoke and keep the wilderness safe. An especially hot, dry summer has everyone on edge. Your supervisor, a woman named Delilah, is available at all times over a small handheld radio and is your only contact with the world you've left behind. Now, I have played Firewatch when it was hot summer actually. It was very hot, so I remember very well the atmosphere, the ambience. I can only highly recommend it. You're creating a bond with Delilah. Delilah is a person on the other end of your walkie-talkie.
I don't talk to the other lookouts as much as I talk to you. Not in the same way.
It's very emotional overall. Such a great game. It's not really that long. If you haven't played it, now do play it. I think it's only like 3 hours long or something. There were moments when I was actually quite scared. It's a fantastic game. I only wish it was a bit longer. Also, there's a new game coming from the Camposanto developers called In the Valley of the Gods. The trailer looks amazing, so I can't wait to play it on my channel. I think it's going to be bloody fantastic. Second game on the list, Last Day of June. Fantastic game. I played it on my channel. It actually made me cry. Created by Ovosonico, Italian games developer, they only released one other game called Murasaki Baby. Music was composed by Steven Wilson, a lead vocalist of Porcupine Tree, that's like a progressive rock band. We're joining Carl and June on what begins as a magical outing to their favorite spot and try to unlock the sequence of events that could save the day and June's life. In this cinematic experience that will compel you to ask yourself, what would I do to save the one I love? If you haven't got that already, you're supposed to save June. That's why the game is called Last Day of June. June is your wife, and basically she keeps dying, and you have to figure out a sequence of events that would lead to her survival, basically. Not a long game. Again, it's beautiful visually and it made me cry quite a lot. It's such a great game. Do play it if you haven't already. Another fantastic game, What Remains of Edith Finch. Created by Giant Sparrow, the team behind the first-person painting game The Unfinished Swan. What Remains of Edith Finch is a collection of strange tales about a family based in Washington state. As Edith, you will explore the colossal Finch house, searching for stories as she explores her family history and tries to figure out why she's the last one in her family left alive. Each story you find lets you experience the life of a new family member on the day of their death, with stories ranging from the distant past to the present day. The gameplay and tone of the stories are as varied as the Finches themselves. The only constant is that each story is played from a first-person perspective, and that each story ends with that family member's death. So basically you're walking through the house and you're sort of finding stories. You're finding out why your family members died, and they're not quite literal, to be honest. They are metaphors. For example, this one guy, I think he was on a swing and he was just swinging and then he flew to the sky. It looked beautiful, it looked nice, but what it meant was that he actually fell off that swing. Such a great game, powerful and emotional. Again, I can only highly recommend it.
But something always felt wrong about the house. Coming back, I finally know what it is. There's just too much of it.
Vanishing of Ethan Carter. Now, this one is quite special because it's Polish, it's from Poland. The Astronauts is an independent game developer located in Warsaw in Poland. They're working on a new title right now called The Witchfire, which sadly won't be story-oriented actually. Now, when it comes to Vanishing of Ethan Carter, you play the game as Paul Prospero, an occult-minded detective who receives a disturbing letter from Ethan Carter. Realizing the boys is in grave danger, Paul arrives at Ethan's home of Red Creek Valley, where things turn out to be even worse than he imagined. Ethan has vanished in the wake of a brutal murder, which Paul quickly discerns might not be the only local murder worth looking into. Now, that game has a unique ambience. You're wandering around the cities, like villages. There's no one there, so you're looking for any trails when it comes to finding Ethan, finding out if he's okay, because he sent you a letter saying that he's in danger. Again, it's a very emotional game. I haven't actually played it. I watched the gameplay and I can only highly recommend it yet again, especially because it's actually set in Poland, not too far away from where I live, like 5 hours south. The areas that you can see are quite familiar to me.
We all have to die. Even you. Even me.
Now, the next game is probably the most unusual one on that list, called Spec Ops The Line, Special Operations The Line. You probably know it as a shooter saga. There's basically a lot of games when it comes to special operations, like I think 8. But this one, I played it 3 years ago and I still remember it very well. The story was so great. It was loosely based on a book actually that I have read. This game is a first-person shooter video game developed by Jaeger Development and published by 2K Games. It is the 8th installment of the classic series. The latest game in the series, Special Operations The Line, was highly acclaimed for its narrative based off the novel Heart of Darkness. Heart of Darkness is a novella by Polish-British novelist Joseph Conrad about a narrated voyage up the Congo River into the Congo Free State in the so-called Heart of Africa. Now, when it comes to that game's plot, it's been 6 months since Dubai was wiped off the map by a cataclysmic sandstorm. Thousands of lives were lost, including those of American soldiers sent to evacuate the city. Today, the city lies buried under sand, the world's most opulent ruin. Now, a mysterious radio signal is picked up from Dubai, and a Delta Raccon team is sent to infiltrate the city. Their mission is simple: locate survivors and radio for evacuation. What they find is a city in the grip of war. To save Dubai, they'll have to find the man at the heart of its madness, Colonel John Conrad. Basically, during the game, you're in touch with John Conrad. Without spoiling too much, this is extremely important. There is a certain moment in the game when something very important happens. It has to happen, you cannot sort of influence that. Let me just tell you, pay attention from that moment on. You'll know what I'm talking about. Such a great story. I think there's 4 endings to it depending on your choices. It's really cool when a game lets you choose an ending, like Life is Strange or Special Operations The Line. Now the next game, that's actually two games, the original and then the sequel. This is probably the most indie game on my list. To the Moon and Finding Paradise, which is a sequel to the Moon. To the Moon. To the Moon is an independent adventure game developed and published by Freebird Games. The story, set in future, follows two doctors who offer to fulfill a dying man's last wish using artificial memories. The game features relatively few gameplay mechanics, with the player controlling two doctors, exploring the narrative and solving puzzles as they try to reconstruct the dying man's memories in order to fulfill his wish. It's quite emotional because in the game you're meeting a dying man. You want to fulfill his last wish, so you have to go back. You're sort of going back in time constantly. You're discovering more and more about that person. You're trying to find out what's his last wish because they're unconscious, and you're trying to find a way to make it happen. Now I only played To the Moon. I am playing Finding Paradise. When I finished To the Moon I cried, and the music is beautiful. Now I know that visually it's probably not the most stunning game because it's strictly 2D, but the story is totally worth it, so I can only recommend both of these games. Great story-driven games. Next game on the list, I think it's pronounced Draugen. I actually received that game as a birthday present from Robert, and it was Lucas who recommended me that game. It was out like a month ago. It's really short, it's also story driven. It has its flaws, but it was good enough for me to recommend it and to place it on that list. Draugen is a first-person horror adventure being created by Red Thread Games. Set in the 1920s, an American naturalist visits a Norwegian fishing village to find that the town's population have vanished. The player must explore the town, discover its fate and survive the night. Red Thread received a further grant from the Norwegian Film Fund to begin working on Draugen. Basically that game promotes Norwegian culture, Norwegian folklore. It's set in Norway, so it's quite beautiful when it comes to the graphics. Now, when it comes to flaws of that game, they did point out some things here and there, like folkloric things that were never actually properly explained. So even though it's a great game, and I think it's going to be continued, there were some flaws. Overall, it was a pleasure to play it, so I do recommend it. It's not that expensive, I think. It's not that long. Give it a go if you like story-driven games. 8th game on that list, Night in the Woods. I have also played it on my channel. This is such a special game. I absolutely loved it. Night in the Woods is a 2D story-focused adventure exploration game with many extracurricular activities to enjoy, characters to meet and secrets to discover. College dropout May Borowski returns home to the crumbling former mining town of Possum Springs, seeking to resume her aimless former life and reconnect with the friends she left behind. But things aren't the same. Home seems different now, and her friends have grown and changed. Leaves are falling and the wind is growing colder. Strange things are happening as the light fades, and there's something in the woods. Now, it appears that the story of May Borowski is not exactly finished, as they announced a prequel this year, so I'm really excited. What's very important about that game is that it actually touches like mental diseases problem, depression and anxiety. You're playing as a cat and it's such a smart game. I can only highly recommend it. I think I said that about every single game on that list, but it's true, these are all fantastic games, and Night in the Woods is such a fun little game. Do play it if you haven't already, especially because there's a prequel coming soon. Oxenfree. Also played it on my channel. It was actually one of the very first games I have ever played on my channel. My camera sucked and my microphone sucked back then. This is what I remember. Oxenfree is a supernatural mystery graphic adventure game developed and published by Night School Studio. It was pretty much the first game. The player controls Alex, a teenager visiting a local island with a group of friends. After accidentally unleashing a paranormal force on the island, Alex and the company must figure out what the force is and how to stop it. Gameplay is built around a walk and talk mechanic. Instead of dialogue occurring during cutscenes, speech bubbles appear over Alex's head, giving the player a choice between 2 or 3 dialogue options. At the same time, Alex remains free to move around and navigate the game world. It's also a great game. It's also choices based, so there's a couple of endings. Now, Alex lost someone, her brother. That subject reappears on that island. It's part of the story. It's very important actually. It's a very good game. It was well received generally speaking when it comes to reviews, so do consider playing it. The only flaw that I can remember is that the text, when you're supposed to say something, pick an option what Alex is supposed to say, they disappear so fast that most of the time I had to randomly pick an option because it just kept disappearing too quickly. Last game that I want to recommend, 10th one. I also played it on my channel not too long ago. 1111 Memories Retold. This is a narrative adventure video game set during the First World War. It was released on 9th November 2018, 2 days before the centennial of the armistice. It was published by Bandai Namco Entertainment. One of the game's main features is its visual style inspired by Impressionist art. The game allows the player to play as two characters during the First World War, a Canadian photographer named Harry Lambert, as well as a German engineer Kurt Waldner. Both engage in the war for different reasons. Harry is attracted by the glory and the desire to seduce his childhood friends, so he decides to follow a major in search of a new war photographer. Kurt, meanwhile, learns on the radio that his son's unit is missing and he decides to join the German military to find him. 1111 Memories Retold also offers to control a cat and a pigeon during certain sequences. It received overall favorable reviews. The game has a score on 77% on Metacritic, especially praising the writing and voicing of the characters. Now, when it comes to characters, Harry was voiced by Elijah Wood, so Frodo from Lord of the Rings, and Kurt was voiced by this German actor called Sebastian Koch. Both great actors. It's an interesting game and there's a bunch of endings as well. As I said, these are 10 less known story-driven games. Obviously, if you're interested in story-driven games, that you probably knew all of them, but maybe for some of you who are only starting their adventure with stories and games, maybe this was helpful, if only a little bit. I think I should also mention Plague Tale Innocence. I haven't finished that game, but story is great so far. It's very similar to The Last of Us, and I wouldn't be myself if I haven't mentioned Mass Effect. Even though it's a first-person shooter game, the story is so great. You know, you can't ever go wrong with playing Mass Effect pretty much. That's it, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you so much for watching that video. Remember to drop a like if you enjoyed it. Remember to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you know when I'm posting a new video. There are social media links in the description like Patreon, Twitter, Instagram and all of that pretty much. So I'll talk to you soon guys. Don't stop gaming. This was Ola from Stop Me All channel. Bye.